For many years I suffered at the hands of my own family, my mother and my older brother, who tormented and bullied me whenever my father was away. Their relentless cruelty eventually drove me to secretly record their abusive behavior and send the evidence directly to my dad. In a dramatic turn of events, he has now filed for divorce, and even more shockingly, some members of my family have gone so far as to say that I should never have been born. I'm a 16-year-old girl, and I have an 18-year-old brother who, at least in my mother's eyes, has always been the golden child. Ever since I was little, it was painfully obvious that my mother preferred my brother over me. I spent years desperately trying to emulate him, copying his every move in the vain hope that I might win her approval. But no matter how hard I tried, whatever endearing quality she admired in him, she seemed to find intolerable in me. Eventually, I gave up on the hopeless mission of trying to impress her. At least my father always accepted me for who I truly was, never demanding that I mirror my brother's every action in order to be worthy of his love. He treated us both as equals, and for that, I will be forever grateful. And if you're following along with my story, please do subscribe, like, and share for the support of my channel. In stark contrast to the unconditional love I received from my father, my mother was never someone I could call a friend or even a caring guardian. She reserved her cruel, harsh demeanor exclusively for the times when it was just her, my brother, and me alone. Whenever my dad was around, she maintained an almost impossibly perfect facade, behaving as if nothing was ever wrong. But as soon as he left, an all too common occurrence during my childhood when he was constantly traveling for work, her true colors would emerge. I would return home from school only to be greeted by a barrage of insults and demeaning comments that attacked my very self-worth. She made it her personal mission to scrutinize every aspect of my appearance, relentlessly nitpicking and criticizing me until I was filled with insecurity and self-doubt. I was an exceptionally skinny child, a trait she incessantly natural aversion to physical exertion. My mother would force me into every sport imaginable, insisting that if I tried hard enough, I could somehow fix my body and become more appealing. She even went as far as force-feeding me enormous amounts of protein, convinced that a surplus of meat would transform me, even though there is only so much meat one can eat before it becomes nauseating, and that's exactly what happened to me. Perhaps it was no coincidence that I later switched to vegetarianism after years of being overloaded with beef and chicken, even though, in truth, I was simply built to be skinny. I didn't even have an issue with my body until she began her vicious critiques. To hide my insecurities, I resorted to wearing baggy clothes and even began using my brother's old hand-me-downs, terrified of what she might say if I ever wore something that clung to my figure. This was the state of my life for many long years, until a turning point arrived when I discovered something that I excelled at: swimming. My mother had never encouraged me to try it, partly because she herself was terrified of water, but when the chance came for me to try out for the school's swimming team, I leaped at the opportunity. And let me tell you, it changed everything. I finally found a passion and a talent that made me feel proud. I poured every ounce of my heart and soul into swimming, and in a remarkably short time, I became more toned, even managed to put on some weight in a healthy way, and saw a dramatic improvement in my self-confidence. I was truly happy for the first time in a long while. Of course, my mother and brother were not pleased with this newfound source of joy, since it meant they had fewer chances to berate me about my appearance. For a brief moment, I almost believed that perhaps they might relent. But I soon discovered just how deeply they harbored their disdain, as they began to devise even more insidious ways to torment me. They started what I now call the Cinderella treatment, a relentless series of demands that I'd be at their beck and call at all times. The moment they saw me relaxing or even taking a brief pause, they would assign me a new list of chores. In fact, whenever my father was away on one of his frequent business trips, I ended up doing every single chore in the house while they sat back, concocting excuses to avoid any work at all. Even if I explained that I was exhausted from school, they would simply retort that there was no one else to do the work. After all, my mother was supposedly too tired, even though she was only in her 40s, and my brother was always too busy with his numerous school activities to help out. Put bluntly, I was forced into the role of the house servant, expected to do everything, no matter how unfair or exhausting it became. And yet, through all of this, I clung to my love for swimming, refusing to let them take away the one thing that brought me genuine joy. For a long time, I never confided in my father about the ongoing abuse. You might wonder why I kept silent about all this torment. The simple answer is that I desperately wanted to maintain peace in our fractured family. I've always been a people pleaser, constantly striving to keep everyone happy, even at the cost of my own well-being. I knew that my dad adored my mother. After all, They were high school sweethearts who married immediately after graduating college, and their love story was something that relatives would proudly recount. The mere thought of shattering that idealized image by exposing the monster my mother had become was unbearable. I was terrified that if my father ever learned the truth about her cruelty, it would break his heart beyond repair. I couldn't bear the idea of being the one to inflict that pain. So I silently hoped and prayed that either he would eventually discover the truth on his own or, perhaps, that my mother might someday change for the better. Sadly, neither happened. I was also plagued by the nagging fear that even if I did muster the courage to tell him, he might not believe me, given the impeccable facade my mother and brother always presented in his presence. The risk of ruining the one loving relationship I had in my family was too great, so I chose to suffer in silence, internalizing my pain day after day. Eventually, however, I reached a point where I could no longer tolerate the constant abuse. The mounting pressure became too overwhelming, and I decided that I had to expose my mother and brother for who they truly were. Their behavior had escalated to such extremes that it was beginning to impact every part of my life. My academic workload had increased dramatically. Now that I was enrolled in several AP classes, I simply could not afford to waste another minute on endless household chores. Adding to the catalyst for my decision, I had recently acquired a phone of my own, a device that had been withheld from me for years by parents who believed it might jeopardize my future. For my 16th birthday, my father gifted me a brand new phone, which became the perfect tool to document the injustice I was enduring. With both the mounting academic pressure and this newfound technological capability in my hands, I concluded that I must finally take a stand and reveal the truth to my father, no matter how painful it might be. Just 2 weeks ago, I experienced an academic setback that epitomized the unfairness of my situation. I received my very first C on an assignment, a grade that was entirely undeserved. The reason for this failure was not a lack of effort on my part, but rather that the day before the assignment was due, I was forced to spend almost the entire day doing laundry. My mother refused to lift a finger, and my brother complained that he was too exhausted to help, leaving me with no choice but to handle all the laundry myself. I knew full well that if I left their laundry undone, it would spark a cascade of complaints and chaos. The time I lost on that endless task left me unable to devote the necessary energy to my essay, resulting in a half-hearted submission and, ultimately, a poor grade. It was profoundly unfair, and the teacher had no idea what was really happening at home, so I couldn't possibly fault her. When I returned home and saw my dismal grade, I confronted my mother and boldly declared that I would no longer shoulder all the household responsibilities alone. I demanded that both she and my brother start contributing their fair share. Instead of listening to me, she coldly retorted that my failure was entirely my fault, that if I had only put in a little more effort, I wouldn't be making excuses. She even went on to remind me that my brother was excelling in every area, while I was busy finding excuses. That confrontation was my final breaking point, the moment when I decided I had endured enough. Although I wasn't able to record that particular exchange at the time, I vowed that the next time she or my brother behaved in such a demeaning manner, I would have my camera set up to capture every moment. And I would send the evidence straight to my father so he could finally see the truth. The very next day after that confrontation, my dad returned home and stayed with us for a few days before leaving on another business trip. I knew all too well that once he left, my mother and brother would once again seize the opportunity to gang up on me and force me to do their chores. Determined not to be a victim any longer, I set up my phone to record everything the moment he departed. As I had anticipated, shortly after my father's exit, my mother and brother stormed into my room without even a hint of politeness, launching into a tirade filled with orders for me to complete a long list of chores immediately. They didn't even bother to say, "Please," it was just an imperative command. At the end of their barrage, they demanded that I get to work at once. This time, however, I mustered the courage to firmly state that I was not going to do any of it. Unbeknownst to them, I was recording their every word. My mother, in her typical venomous manner, called me a lazy cow, and claimed that she was simply training me to handle all the work because, in her eyes, my dismal grades and inherent laziness meant that I would never amount to anything. According to her, studying was a pointless waste of time and money. My brother quickly joined in, arguing that just because he could manage everything did not mean I could, and that I should simply give up trying because it was pathetic. He even insisted that my only future might be as a housekeeper, a destiny I found utterly demeaning. They continued with several more harsh and insulting remarks, even more cutting than usual, and I was grateful that I had recorded every word. Even though my blood was boiling with anger, I kept silent, fully aware that this might be the final time they would have the chance to bully me together before I put an end to it all once and for all. After they had finished their verbal assault, my mother barked at me to get to work immediately, dismissing any further discussion, and then abruptly left the room, slamming the door behind her. Taking advantage of the silence that followed, I stopped the recording and immediately sent the video along with a long, detailed message to my father. In that message, I poured out everything I had been holding in for so many years. The constant bullying, the way both my mother and brother would gang up on me whenever my dad wasn't around, and how they treated me like a maid in my own home. I described every nasty comment, every moment when fear kept me from standing up for myself, and how all of it had begun to severely impact my grades and overall well-being. Remarkably, it had been less than an hour since my father left the house when I sent that video. Although I suspected he might already have been on a flight, fortune smiled upon me. He hadn't boarded yet, and he was able to see my message in time. As soon as he saw it, he instructed me to lock myself in my room and refrain from doing anything further while he rushed back home. I then spent about 45 minutes quietly locked in my room, waiting in a mix of fear and anticipation. Soon enough, I heard the sound of my dad's car pulling into the driveway, and I immediately sensed that the situation was about to escalate dramatically. Even as I heard my mom open the door and call out to him, asking why he had returned so soon, I remained hidden, bracing myself for the confrontation that was sure to follow. Within seconds, I heard my father's angry voice ringing out as he began yelling at my mom about the video I had sent him. He demanded answers, asking both her and my brother what they were thinking, and why they had thought it acceptable to treat me so poorly. They attempted to brush it off as a joke, a mere prank, but my father had already read my message, and he was having none of it. He ordered them to cut out the nonsense immediately, and demanded a full explanation. In that moment, my mother realized that there was no longer any way to hide her abusive behavior. My father now knew every sordid detail. Overwhelmed, she began begging and apologizing, claiming that her frustration and exhaustion had gotten the better of her, and that she had unfairly taken it out on me. But my dad was relentless, insisting that he knew the real reason behind her actions, a reason he refused to elaborate on further. After that heated exchange, they retreated into their bedroom, where I could hear muffled shouting, though I couldn't make out the details. After roughly half an hour of tense silence, the situation took a dramatic turn. My mother began packing her bags while sobbing hysterically, and my father ordered my brother to accompany her without a word of protest. By the time I finally emerged from my room, I had little idea of what exactly had transpired, but one thing was abundantly clear: the outcome was far from good. Once my mother and brother had left, it was just my dad and me. Summoning every ounce of courage, I finally asked him what had happened. He offered only sparse details, reassuring me that I was now safe and that I would no longer have to endure my mother's tyranny. At that moment, his mood was visibly somber and troubled, so I didn't press him for further answers. Instead, I quietly retreated back into my room. The next day, my dad came to me, apologizing for the harshness of his behavior the previous day, explaining that the stress had simply overwhelmed him. He then reiterated that I no longer needed to worry about my mother. He was filing for divorce, and from now on, it would be just the two of us. He also expressed regret that I had had to suffer her abuse for so long, and he wished that I had confided in him sooner so that he could have stopped it before it spiraled out of control. Despite his regrets, his decision was final, and he held on to a hopeful vision of a better future for just the two of us. In truth, I felt an immense sense of relief and even a measure of happiness at the news of the divorce. It signified that I would no longer be forced to live under my mother's oppressive rule, a rule that had tormented me for 16 long years. Alongside unexpected news, my mother had officially been served with divorce papers. I learned of this not through any official announcement, but via a phone call from my maternal grandparents. My relationship with them had always been strained. They were merely extensions of my mother's toxic influence, and I had long harbored resentment toward them. When they called, I initially tried to ignore the call, but they persisted until I finally answered. Almost immediately, I was met with a barrage of hateful words. They shouted that I was a curse on the family, and insisted that everyone would be better off without me. Their voices were filled with venom and long-standing animosity. They accused me of ruining their daughter's life, claiming that I was the reason my mother was getting divorced, and that all the years of marriage had been rendered meaningless because of me. They even called me ungrateful, reminding me that my mother had risked her own life during a complicated pregnancy, something I had never even known about, only for me to come along and, in their eyes, ruin everything. My grandmother coldly stated that my mother had risked her life not to bring a child into this world, but to have a child who would one day destroy her marriage, and she wished that my mother had terminated the pregnancy instead. My grandfather twisted the knife even further by asking if I was finally happy now that I supposedly had the house to myself, insinuating that my father's decision to divorce was somehow for my benefit because he would no longer have to see my mother. I tried to explain that I never intended for any of this to happen, that I never wanted a divorce, but before I could even get a word out, they abruptly hung up and blocked my number. Since that call, I have been overwhelmed by guilt and self-blame, feeling as though I had become the worst person on earth. I know they were trying to manipulate me, and in many ways, I feel as though they succeeded, leaving me desperate to fix what had been broken. I want to address a question many of you have asked: am I adopted, or was I an unwanted child? While I still don't have every answer, I can say with absolute certainty that I am not adopted. However, the painful truth remains that, based on my mother's behavior, I very likely was an unwanted pregnancy. I'm not apologizing to her, nor am I trying to undo what I've done. I'm not asking my father to cancel the divorce. There's no going back now. My grandparents and my mom can continue to be angry for all the years they put me through. They don't deserve any forgiveness, sympathy, or good things to come their way. Their behavior, especially during that horrible phone call, has proven time and again that they are unworthy of my compassion. It's almost miraculous that I even feel any guilt about the situation, but I suppose that's just the remnants of my people-pleasing nature, a part of me that I'm actively trying to overcome so it doesn't sabotage my future. I recently had a heartfelt conversation with my dad about all of this, and we both agreed that it would be beneficial for me to begin therapy. I explained that I had kept silent for so long because I never wanted to make anyone unhappy, especially not him, for fear that the truth about my mother would shatter his heart. I also clung to a futile hope that, someday, my mom might change and begin treating me like a human being. That hope was in vain, and along with my self-doubt about whether my dad would believe me if I finally told him everything, I felt compelled to gather undeniable proof before speaking up. Now, with so many issues to work through, my dad and I have decided that starting therapy is the best way forward, and if all goes well, I might begin sessions in just a few days. I'm back with another update, and today I finally have an answer to the question that has haunted me for so long: why did my mother hate me? Many of you were right to suspect that while I wasn't adopted, I was indeed the result of an unwanted pregnancy. I recently summoned the courage to ask my dad about a remark he made during that heated argument with my mother, the day he eventually kicked her out of the house. In my original post, I mentioned that he alluded to knowing the real reason behind my mother's cruelty toward me, but at the time, I was too emotionally drained to press him further. I didn't want to add to his troubles, and it seemed like he wasn't ready to discuss it either. However, today I brought it up again. I explained that I had been deeply troubled by his vague comment, especially since I hadn't been able to hear the rest of their private conversation. After some time, my dad finally confided in me. He told me, with a heavy heart, that the truth was as I had feared. I was indeed the result of an unwanted pregnancy. My mother, who already had one child, had initially wanted to terminate the pregnancy when she discovered she was expecting me. However, my dad was upset by that thought, and though he never explicitly ordered her to keep the baby, his disappointment influenced her decision. I was born amid numerous complications, and those early struggles seemed to have drained her physically and emotionally, leading her to resent me from the very start. My dad recounted that she admitted to never truly feeling connected to me as an infant, a fact he had initially attributed to postpartum depression, which he hoped would eventually fade. But it never did. In a moment of shared vulnerability, both of us burst into tears. Even though I had long suspected this dark truth, hearing it confirmed by him was profoundly painful. He expressed his own deep remorse, feeling responsible for everything I had endured. We embraced tightly in that emotionally cathartic moment, and while I still feel the sting of that revelation, I now understand that I owe my mother nothing. Though I acknowledge that she brought me into this world, her subsequent treatment of me left me with no gratitude, only a resolve to let go of the past and move forward with my life. Hey folks, here's my most recent update. I've been attending therapy for about 2 weeks now, 2 sessions per week, with one session dedicated solely to me and another where my dad and I work together on rebuilding our relationship. The therapy has been going well, and I'm hopeful that I will continue to grow and heal from the trauma of my past. My dad and I are actively working on forging a healthier, more supportive bond, starting from scratch and building up a new, positive relationship. On the legal front, the divorce proceedings are underway, and just a few days ago, my mom and brother returned to collect the last of their belongings. My mom is moving permanently in with her parents, and my brother is following suit. They have made every effort to avoid any interaction with me, and in a way, I'm grateful for that. It means I won't have to endure their toxic presence or be forced into conversations with them any longer. They can continue to harbor hatred for all they want, but it doesn't change the fact that they brought this situation upon themselves through years of cruelty. I refuse to feel any pity for them. Right now, all I care about is rebuilding my relationship with my dad and living my life as fully and happily as possible. Each day has become a journey toward healing, a journey filled with both painful memories and hopeful steps forward. Though the wounds inflicted by my mother and brother have left deep scars, I now see that exposing their behavior was a necessary act of self-preservation. I am determined to reclaim my life from the shadows of abuse and to forge a future where I am valued and respected. I continue to work on my self-worth in therapy, and with my dad by my side, I am beginning to rebuild a sense of normalcy and happiness that had long been denied to me. The road ahead may be long and fraught with challenges, but I am resolute in my commitment to living my life to the fullest, free from the tyranny of my past.